DJs. Darkside. Tonight we're going to be reading another from Terrifying Tales to Tell at Night. And this one is called The Sidewise Lady by Linda E. Rucker. A family vanished 60 years after the house's previous occupants died under mysterious circumstances. An old house of ancient, unknown, and perhaps evil provenance. A specter known only enigmatically as the Sidewise Lady. And a small town caught in the grip of terror for more than 100 years. Toby said, "We aren't gripped by terror." "Shut up," Stevie said. She went on reading. What is known today as the Beaumont House was disassembled in England, brought to the small town of Ellington, Virginia in the United States, and reassembled by a man who made his fortune in the railways around the turn of the 20th century. His beloved wife wanted to live in a castle. The Beaumont House is not quite a castle, but it was then and still is today the biggest, most ostentatious house in town. Toby asked, "What's ostentatious?" "Fancy." At first, the railway man and his wife entertained often at the house, holiday events that the whole town was invited to, parties, even a few balls. But after a year or so, and quite suddenly, everything stopped. The house was closed up, the man and his wife rarely left, and the next anyone heard of them, they were both found dead in the house of unknown causes. "What does that mean?" Toby asked again. "It means they don't know what killed them." "Rabies?" Toby suggested. He was obsessed with rabies these days, having seen something about it online or in school. "People don't just come down with rabies, Toby. It's not like getting a cold. Now stop interrupting and let me finish reading you this." The house stayed closed up for over 60 years, sinking into its own decay. But in the months before the arrival of the Beaumonts in the late 1960s, it hummed with life again, workmen reviving and restoring the place. When the Beaumont family arrived, mother, father, and 3 teenage children, it seemed at first as though the place might truly return to its old, if brief, glory. Nat Beaumont was a state senator with a promising political career ahead of him. Some said he'd be governor within a few years. His wife, Thelma, had been a teacher before marrying him and having children, and like the first couple who lived there, they opened the house up to parties and celebrations. But after a few months, the strangeness started again. People said Kathleen Beaumont, the oldest of the 3 teenagers, was behaving oddly. She told her friends at school that someone called the Sidewise Lady had come to live in her house. One of her schoolmates reported that when a teacher reprimanded her for falling asleep in class, she said the Sidewise Lady kept waking her up by trying to get in her bed. Not long after that, Kathleen's parents pulled her out of school completely. They mentioned to a few people that they were taking her to see doctors, but the town went wild with rumors. Her friends said she claimed to have summoned a demon, and the story was that the family sought a priest to come in to exorcise, although the local clergy denied any knowledge of such a thing. And then, on Halloween night, 1969, the entire family went missing. There were no signs of violence or foul play. There was no sign of anything at all. Luggage, purses, money, identification, keys, anything you might take if you went on the run were left behind. Plus, there was no whiff of scandal that would have caused the family to take such a drastic step. The focus of law enforcement fell on the missing Nat Beaumont all the same, but despite a nationwide search, no trace of him nor his family was ever found. In Ellington, It was different. The rumors grew over the years that Kathleen had murdered them all, her parents and her younger brother and sister, Hugh and Sarah. But she was gone like the rest of them. Many say now that Kathleen's demon-ridden spirit haunts the abandoned Beaumont house, luring unwary passerby to the same doom she took her family to. For now, it seems, the truth about the Beaumont house remains unknown unless True Hauntings decides to pay it a visit and unearth its secrets once and for all. Got a tip about a haunted house in your town? Send us the story and maybe we'll feature it in our website. We might even do a True Hauntings show about it. Thanks to Hannah B. for sending us this one, and remember, stay spooky. Toby said, "That show is dumb. It isn't real." Stevie tried not to show her little brother how exasperated she was with him. "But it's our favorite." "It's your favorite." "We can go check out the house and maybe send something about it to them, and maybe they'll come and investigate it. Wouldn't that be cool? Maybe they'd even put us on the show." "If the stuff they say about ghosts in that show is real," Toby said, "how come Mom never tries to contact us?" Stevie, who had been kneeling in front of him, pasting cut-out stars on the old overcoat he wore, a wizard's cloak, she assured him, sat back on her heels. "Because," she replied, "Mom is at peace. Ghosts haunt places because they aren't at peace. Mom said she left us, but she knows we're okay and she doesn't have to do any haunting. Anyway, see, she said she'd always be with us. Remember what she told us? Look for me in the moonlight and on the wind. And when we look up at the moon tonight, we can think about her watching us." She handed him a stick with shredded yellow and orange construction paper taped on the end of it. "There's your wizard's wand." Toby looked at it dubiously. "I don't get it." "It's flames coming out of the wand." She gave him a hug. "You look like a powerful magician," she said. "It's an awesome costume." What he looked like really was a sad, anxious little boy swallowed up by his father's cast-off overcoat. She felt she'd betrayed her mother because she didn't dress up this year like she had at her old school in the witch costume her mother had made her when she was Toby's age, and altered every year as she grew. She'd overheard kids saying 12 was too old to dress up for Halloween. And it was hard being the new kid in a new school in a new town. Of course, as it turned out, half of those kids did dress up after all. She'd sat through math, social studies, and science surrounded by zombies and cats and vampires and superheroes, feeling human and vulnerable. Halloween is witchy. That's what their mother used to say. She had loved Halloween. For weeks beforehand, the house would be draped in orange and black. A skeleton might take up residence in the rocking chair before a front window. Fake tombstones sprouted in the yard with funny epitaphs she took from a book by a man named Edward Gorey. G is for George, smothered under a rug. Last year, the day after Halloween, some parents had come to talk to her. Apparently she'd gone too far and frightened their children. She'd had to invite the kids over for something innocuous, something ridiculous, cookies and Kool-Aid, and showing them around, showing them that it really wasn't a witch house, and that nothing bad could hurt them. Stevie had never seen her mother as exhausted as she'd been at the end of that day. "No wonder I don't hang with the other parents," she had said, tucked up in bed while Stevie brought her cups of tea. "God, they're boring. Are they all like that?" "Pretty much," Stevie replied. It was the reason she didn't have a lot of friends either. That never bothered her until her mother died and she and Toby had to leave the witch house and their old town and everything from her whole old life behind, and she went from few friends to no friends in the new place. "Let's make a deal," she said to Toby now. "I'll take you trick-or-treating, and when we're done, we'll walk over to the Beaumont house. If you think it's too weird or scary, we won't go inside, but we'll just look at it from the outside." Toby still looked doubtful. She leaned in close to him and whispered in his ear in a silly, growly voice, "We won't stop until we have all the candy." He giggled and she said it again, "All the candy." "Okay," he agreed, still giggling. "Okay," she said. "Wait here. I got to get dressed, and then we'll eat something and we'll go." Her witch dress was too short and too tight, but Stevie didn't know how to sew or how to find someone who did to fix it. She guessed it was the last year she'd be wearing it. She could fit into it barely, but it was kind of hard to breathe. Magic in every stitch of it. That's what her mother always said. For my witchy baby girl. Stevie was making them hot dogs for dinner when their dad came in from work. Living with him was weird, like living with a stranger, which he was. A distant figure they only saw a couple times a year until suddenly they had to move in with him. He tried, she'd give him that. Every once in a while he turned up with a pizza and a clutch of Blu-rays announcing it was family night. They took dutiful part. The movies were usually too young for either of them, and their father always fell asleep before they were over. He looked faintly surprised to see them there in the kitchen, as he often did, like he'd forgotten he had children. Stevie said, "Hi, Dad. Want me to make you a hot dog?" He shook his head. "What are you kids up to tonight?" "I'm taking Toby out trick-or-treating." "Well, don't be late." He opened the fridge, stared at it a while, and closed it again without taking anything out. "And be careful," he said as he left the room, like he remembered those were the kinds of things dads were supposed to say. The moon was nearly full and peeking at them through the black branches of trees as they headed out. They passed a gaggle of Harry Potter characters and several princesses. "All those houses have their lights on. Why aren't we stopping?" Toby asked. "There are better houses farther on," Stevie said. She wanted to get away from their neighbors, go to some streets where nobody knew who they were, and would answer the door without that expression that said, "It's those poor children with the dead mother," where they could just be regular kids. She also wanted to keep them moving in the direction of the Beaumont House, which was a couple of miles walk away. Kind of far for Toby, but she'd hoped that the trick-or-treating would distract him. "My bag's too heavy," he said eventually. She poured half of it into her bag and handed it back to him. "Well, now you have all the candy. You can have it all when we get home." "My feet hurt." The moon scudded behind the clouds, and they found themselves walking through an older part of town with no streetlights. Just as Toby started in with, "I don't care about the haunted house any longer. I want to go home," they were there. Stevie had not been able to find any photos of the Beaumont house online, but what they saw before them was better than her imagination. Set back from the road, surrounded by an iron gate, a dark and dilapidated form against a darker October sky. She and Toby stood there for a moment. I don't like it," Toby said. "Let's go home." "It's haunted, you know," came a voice from behind them. Kids from school. Stevie recognized them, a set of twins, a boy and a girl. They were both tall and pale with short dark hair, and tonight they were wearing black jeans and black hoodies. "Are you guys urbexers too?" the girl asked. Stevie remembered her name then, Taylor, and her brother was Tristan. "What's an urbexer?" "Urban explorer," Tristan replied. "We explore abandoned places." "We just came to see the haunted house," Stevie said. "That makes you an urbexer, as long as you do it right," explained Tristan. "What's doing it right?" "Stay calm, don't mess with anything, leave it the way you found it, don't get caught." "Well, that was the plan," Stevie said, "but I'm not an urban explorer, I'm a ghost hunter." Taylor said, "We've never explored a place that was supposed to be haunted before." 4 seemed like a lot for a ghost hunt. If you had too many people, the ghosts probably wouldn't show themselves. That was why you had never heard about ghosts turning up in, say, football stadiums or malls. On the other hand, as the saying went, there was safety in numbers. Stevie said, "You know that show, True Hauntings? They might come here and investigate it. I'm checking it out for them." "Why would they hire a kid?" asked Tristan. "Oh, it's not like a hiring thing," Stevie said. "It's like a consultant." "I don't believe you," Taylor said. "Anyway, that show's about fake stuff," Tristan said. "This isn't fake. Our grandmother knew that girl, Kathleen Beaumont. They were friends. She remembers when it all happened." "What does she think happened to them?" "She said she didn't think Kathleen would hurt anybody." "What about that Sidewise lady?" Taylor spoke up. "I knew someone who saw her once." "Really?" Taylor nodded solemnly. "She said it was terrifying, what she did." Stevie was almost too afraid to ask. "What was it?" Taylor stopped. She stood sideways. "Don't be mean, Taylor," Tristan admonished, but Stevie was embarrassed. The evening was going to ruin. She wanted to take Toby and go home, but she didn't want them, Taylor especially, to think she was a coward. The four of them stood and looked at the house before them. Stevie had the feeling that the house stared back, that its blank windows were eyes. Stevie and Toby stashed their bags of Halloween candy in the bushes — Taylor and Tristan didn't have any — and picked their way across the overgrown yard. The closer they got to the house, the tighter a little ball in Stevie's stomach curled. Tristan whispered, "Did you bring flashlights?" She shook her head. "First rule of urbexing is you should always be prepared," Tristan explained and pressed one into her hand. "Don't you have any ghost hunting equipment?" Kevin and Lori, the hosts on True Hauntings, always went prepared. Stevie hadn't even thought about how they were going to get into the house. That, at least, did not seem to be a problem. As they stepped up onto the porch, she could see that the front door was slightly ajar. Stevie hung back and let Tristan and Taylor go in first before following behind, holding Toby's hand tightly. They played their flashlight beams along the ceiling, the walls. They were standing in an empty foyer, a hallway that disappeared into darkness, doors on either side, a stairway in front of them. Wallpaper hung in strips. She couldn't discern the pattern, but it made her shudder all the same because it suddenly made her think of flayed skin. What if houses were like people? What if they hurt? What if they were full of all these complicated emotions that people carried inside them? What would happen if you opened a door and let those feelings out? Taylor whispered, "Let's go upstairs." And then someone said, "What are you children doing in my house?" The woman, staring at them, holding a lantern up next to a wrinkled face, framed by wild white hair, was wearing a white, high-necked, old-fashioned nightgown. Her feet were bare. She must have come through one of the closed doors in the hallway that stretched before them into the darkness, but they could not see which one. For a long moment, none of them said a word. Then the woman continued, "If you've come here to steal from me, I don't have any money. There's nothing here to take." "Oh," Stevie said. She didn't know she was going to make a noise until it was out. She was horrified that the woman thought they were thieves. "No, we thought nobody lived here." "Nobody does," the woman said. "I'm nobody." Taylor asked, "Are you Kathleen Beaumont?" "That name sounds familiar," the woman replied, "but I don't think I've ever had a name." Stevie said, "We're very sorry. We'll go." "Oh, you can't go just yet," the woman responded. "It's Halloween night, isn't that right? Come and sit with me. I have some cakes I can give you. That's what you want on Halloween, isn't it? Sweets?" She smiled, but when she did, her grin reminded Stevie of the wolf in a fairy tale. a mouth stretched back from long canine teeth. Stevie said quickly, "No, I'm so lonely," the woman continued. "No one ever comes to see me. Now I have my own little witch and little wizard visitors, and even they don't want to stay." Stevie remembered that they were supposed to be ghost hunters, and when you were a ghost hunter, when somebody invited you further into a haunted house, you weren't supposed to say no. They followed the woman into a room off the foyer. It had been a grand room once, you could tell, but now it was empty, save for a crumbling fireplace, a chandelier that had fallen at some point and been placed in a corner, and dozens of candles the woman had lit and set about the floor. They had to move carefully to avoid them. "Wait here, my dears," she said, and there was that horrible parody of a smile again. "I'll be right back." And she went through another doorway. To Toby, who had never been so quiet, Stevie warned, "Don't eat anything she gives you." "Well, she's not standing sideways, so aside from her being crazy as hell, we're probably okay," Taylor said. The woman was back faster than Stevie expected, carrying a tray with 4 small china plates, each with what she guessed was a piece of cake on it. It was hard to tell in the candlelight. The woman passed them out, and they all stood there awkwardly holding them. Stevie finally thought of an excuse. "I can't eat gluten," she said. "Neither can my brother." "What, dearie?" "I'm so sorry," Stevie said. "I have no idea what you're talking about," the woman said. "Whatever it is, I'm sure there's none of that nastiness in my cakes." Taylor asked, "Do you live here alone?" The woman didn't answer for a while. Then she said, "I think there used to be others here with me. I think I had a family once." Then Toby blurted out, "Did you kill your family?" Stevie hissed, "Toby!" But the woman turned her gaze on him. She looked at him for a while, and then smiled her unsettling smile. "I believe I may have," she said. "Chop, chop, chop, chop into little pieces." Toby gaped. "I'm only teasing, honey. I can't remember. But I think they made up stories about me. You know how small towns are. It was such a long time ago. Will you excuse me for a moment?" The woman got up and went back through the door she'd come out of. The children sat frozen for a moment, and then Stevie looked at her cake. "Guys," she said. The cakes, they could now see, were black lumps of mold. A terrible smell came off of them, and Stevie saw something white moving on hers. Maggots. She let out a little cry and dropped it. And then, as though a draft had blown through the room, though they felt nothing, the candles extinguished themselves. They didn't need to discuss their next move. The 4 children bolted from the room and back into the foyer. Taylor grabbed the door and yanked it. It wouldn't budge. Tristan tried. They all did. "You're the ghost hunter," Tristan said. "What should we do?" "I'm not really," Stevie admitted. "I just want to be one someday. Really, I'm a witch." "Stop lying," Taylor snapped. "I'm not, and this is a witch's dress." "If you're a witch," Tristan said, "could you get us out of this?" "That," said Taylor, "would be super helpful." "I don't even know if she's a ghost or not." They were all talking at once now. "I think she's real, a person. I don't think she killed anybody. I think she killed everybody. I don't know what she is. I don't care what she is. If she's a ghost, she can't hurt us. She's just like a movie that shows you scary things." That was Toby. "That's what our mom used to say about scary movies." Tristan pointed out, "This isn't a movie." Everyone talked at once again. She's so old, it's not like she can do anything to hurt us. She can if she has an axe. I bet she's never hurt a fly. Who is she anyway? Is it her? It might not be her. She might be a demon. We could break one of the windows in that room and climb out, and I'm not going back in there. Stevie wondered what Kev and Lori, the ghost hunters, would do. But the worst thing they ever had to contend with was a cold spot in the house or some creepy noises. Still, it gave her the courage she needed. "I'll do it," she said. The front door probably swung shut in that breeze and locked. She'll have a key. She turned and shoved the door open that they'd just come through. "Miss Beaumont," she called out, and was surprised at how steady her voice sounded. That made her feel even calmer. Stevie called out again, "Miss Beaumont." She went to the other door and pushed it open. She expected it to be a kitchen of some sort, but it was just another big, dark, empty room. The woman was standing over in the corner by a window, just standing there, not doing or saying anything. Stevie tried to say her name again, but nothing came out. She took a few steps into the room and felt the temperature drop. It was just like Kev and Lori talked about on True Hauntings. The dark felt solid, like it was pressing in on her chest. It seemed like there was something wrong with the woman, more wrong than anything they'd already observed, but she couldn't put her finger on what the problem was. Stevie found her voice at last and asked, "Are you okay?" In that moment, the moon must have moved from behind a cloud because a shaft of moonlight fell through the window and across the figure. It wasn't the same woman who had welcomed them into the house earlier. It was a young woman, dressed in clothes of some long ago period, her profile that of a beautiful lady with hair pulled back from a flawless face. But she held herself with a peculiar kind of tension. And then she turned. Only one side was the beautiful young woman. The other was a gaping horror. That face, that entire side of her body had rotted away. An eye in a ruined socket, teeth set in a clacking jaw of bones, a bare rib cage with tattered pieces of flesh and soft tissue hanging from it. All about the figure there was a great darkness. Its eyes fixed on her, and its mouth opened, and it let out a howl that seemed to go on forever. It raised its hands and spread its fingers, 5 thin, pale, flawless digits, and 5 bony claws. The thing flew across the room. The mouth opened wider and wider, impossibly wide, as though it would swallow her whole. Stevie's legs didn't work. Her voice didn't work. "I'm a witch," she thought. "I'm a witch. I'm a witch. Magic in every stitch. I'll be with you in the moonlight and in the wind." And the world went black. Someone was crying. "Stevie!" It was Toby's voice. The first thing she saw was his face hanging over hers. The next was the night sky behind him and the moon. Toby burst into tears. Stevie pushed herself into a sitting position. They were sitting on the sidewalk just on the other side of the gate from the Beaumont house. "I saw her," she said. "The Sidewise lady. She's real." "Whatever you saw, it gave you superhuman strength or something," Taylor told her. They all started talking at once again, but from what she could gather, she had come bolting out of the room. "Your feet weren't touching the ground," Toby said, past the foyer where they were gathered, and yanked the door open like it had never been stuck. They had raced across the yard and through the gate when she had collapsed, and they had been trying to revive her for a good 10 minutes. "If you saw the Sidewise lady," Tristan asked, "then who was the woman we met in there?" Stevie's head felt like someone was hitting it over and over again with a sledgehammer. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe it was her in another form, trying to trick us. Maybe a ghost. But ghosts don't get old." "I don't know what ghosts do," Stevie said. Toby cried every part of the way home because he was so scared and so relieved. and the rest of the way home because he left his candy behind. Stevie had to promise him she'd get him more candy, and that night she slept on the floor of his room, so he wouldn't be scared, she told herself, but it was really for herself. She hung her witch's dress in the back of her closet where she knew it would be safe, but she couldn't see it. She wasn't sure she ever wanted to look at it again. For weeks she often woke, startled, with the sense that someone had just slipped out of her room. Over time, the fear dissipated, though she still slept fitfully. At school, she and Tristan and Taylor avoided each other. She thought Taylor might have said some mean things about her to some of the other kids because people started ignoring her even more than usual. A few times she tried to write a letter to True Hauntings, but she didn't know what to say, and she eventually abandoned the project. In the spring, a ferocious tornado ripped through town. It took the roof off a gas station and broke some windows at the high school, but it seemed to have a special fury reserved for one place in particular. Stevie got a copy of the local newspaper, the Ellington Herald, that reported on the destruction. She cut out the relevant article. Ellington's grandest home is no more. A structure known locally as the Beaumont House that has stood for more than 100 years in Ellington, and for centuries before that in its original home in the English countryside, received the brunt of yesterday's destructive storm. Winds measuring at over 150 miles per hour tore through town, but it was the Beaumont House that was the focus of the storm's force, and much higher winds. Nearby buildings were left undamaged. The Beaumont House has lived in for fewer than 3 of its nearly 120 years in Ellington. The short-lived residencies of its 2 owners and the mysterious circumstances surrounding their deaths or disappearances gave rise to rumors of hauntings. Real estate agent Heather Woodrow says she attempted to sell or even rent the house several times on behalf of Adam Beaumont, a descendant of the brother of former state senator Nathaniel Beaumont, who, along with his family, was last seen at the home in 1968. Woodrow says despite the house's remarkable features and long history, potential buyers were always put off by what they said was a bad feeling they got on walkthroughs. I never felt anything like that myself, Woodrow acknowledged. I think they probably heard stories that influenced how they felt about it when they finally got around to looking at it. Still, you'd think some people would believe it was fun to live in a haunted house. I guess I just never found the right buyers. The Beaumont House was brought to America in 1899 by Ralph Brightman, a railway baron who wanted a castle for his wife. It seems likely that if Brightman or his wife had done any research into the house that was nestled deep in the Devon countryside and sold for a pittance to the rich American on the grounds that it be moved but not destroyed, they might have chosen a different dwelling. According to the local historical society there, the house, which was built in the 17th century, had long been the focus of stories about wealthy peers dabbling in occult rites. One old legend in particular concerned an entity known locally as the Sidewise Lady. Half woman and half demon, she lured people with her unearthly beauty before turning to reveal her demonic other half. It was said that many a weary traveler vanished in the vicinity of the house, and which had been abandoned for decades by the time that Brightman had purchased it. Over the years, there were local efforts from time to time to have the city of Ellington purchase the home and use it for community events, but these plans always stalled. Now Ellington's peculiar landmark is no more. Stevie kept the article folded up in her desk drawer. She went back to the True Hauntings website a few times to reread the story there, but she wasn't able to find it again. A few weeks after the tornado, she rode her bike over to the site of the Beaumont House one Sunday afternoon. A demolition crew had clearly been working to clean up and haul off the debris the storm had left behind. Their equipment, a bulldozer, an excavator with a long yellow arm crooked up toward the sky, sat amid neatly stacked piles of rubble. Nothing was left that was recognizable as a house. The storm's fury had been precise and thorough. All the same, there was something strange in the air where the house had been. An emptiness, as if a void could have a presence and a shape. Stevie left her bike on the sidewalk and ignored the signage warning her to keep off the property. She stood where she remembered the porch had been, and then took a few steps further into the hallway, the room with the candles, and the terrible place where she had seen the Sidewise lady. Ever since the tornado, a thought had haunted her, and she could not make it go away. The storm might have destroyed the house, but what if instead of destroying the Sidewise lady along with it, the wind had scattered her far and wide, releasing her from the walls that kept her captured for centuries? What if now the Sidewise lady could be anywhere she wanted to be? A shadow moved across the sun, and the warm spring day went cold. I hope you enjoyed.